Power of She is USISPF's newest podcast series where we showcase the brilliance of women professionals across an eclectic mix of industry and amplify the voices of inspiring women in leadership, riveting dialogues and candid conversations to uncover her story. We intend to go beyond the boardroom and perhaps to the virtual drawing room where we can have intimate, heartfelt conversation focused on getting to know the person beyond the persona. My guest today is a very special Menon vandePol, the head of Baker and McKenzie's Asia Pacific Investigation Compliance and Ethics Group. Minnie, thank you for chatting with us and welcome to the Power of She.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So Minnie, consistency is everything, and one thing I'm consistent about on the show is I always say we love to do the Julie Andrews thing of starting at the beginning, a very good place to start. I want to take you back to your early days, your memory from your formative years. You mentioned your father's played a pivotal role in your life. So take us back to childhood and the young teen years when you were coming into adulthood.
Wow, that is a long time ago. But yeah, I was born in Kerala, in a little town called Muatupura, which is just outside of Kochi. And I was the first child of the family. And in fact, my brother didn't come along until 11 years later. So I was an only child for all those 11 years. So I grew up with my grandparents, which was a group family basis. My father was still studying. So my father was 21 and my mother was 19 when they had me. So, they were children themselves. So my grandparents were very important figures in my life, particularly my grandfather, who was a civil engineer, and he'd been in the Second World War with the British up in north of India, but he'd learned English. And that was very important in the years to come. So anyway, I had a very lovely upbringing for 6 years in India. And then my father won an All India scholarship to do his PhD in Australia. And that was interesting because nobody else in his family had gone overseas. He had a dream. He wanted to explore a bit of the world. And so he went off to Adelaide in Australia. And he was there for a whole year, and he saved up all of his funds from his scholarship to bring my mother and I to Australia a year later. So I moved to Australia when I was 6.
Yeah.
And grew up in Australia. So it was already a big change in my life, going from a small little town in Kerala where we were still bringing the water up from the well. We were, there was no refrigerator. Everything was cooked fresh. We had a whole community around us. And then suddenly I was transported to just a family of my mum, my dad, and myself in a strange country where I didn't speak the language. So quite a change.
Yeah, I can almost empathize, as you mentioned from your childhood. I'm a younger sibling as well, and I'm an elder sister who reminds me of life before I was around. And my father's a civil engineer, so um, this is very interesting because I'm a bit of a Australia tragic, like a cricket tragic, and having read Donald Horne's Lucky Country and Jeff Blaney's Tyranny of Distance, it's fascinating because you grew up in a town in Australia at a time when Australia wasn't a very diverse place, and if I'm not mistaken, you were probably the only Asian girl in your school. So it was a sense of trying to find identity in a place that was supposed to be home, but yet unfamiliar.
Yeah, it was interesting because in Adelaide actually it was fine. It was a bit of an interesting. South Australia was quite different. It had a premier who was married to a Malaysian woman. He believed in multiculturalism. So when we did Dad's studies there, we were surrounded by international people, and I thought that was what Australia was. But my father's first posting was with Melbourne University, and he's an agronomist. So we were literally in the country. So it's like 3 hours outside of Melbourne in a very small country town. First of all, we were on campus and then in the nearby town. And that is where I was literally the only Asian in my school. And I don't mean Indian or dark skinned, I meant Asian. So no Chinese, not even any Indigenous Australians. So quite, it was quite a challenge because, of course, when you're different, there's an element of curiosity, but also an element of I don't know what she's like. And of course, my mother did give me some nice packed lunches that had spices and flavors that were very different to the ham and cheese sandwiches that other people had. So in that respect, it was a bit of a culture shock for them and for me probably. But yeah, it was kind of tough.
No, I can imagine because there's so much literature on the Indian American story coming to the U.S. in the 70s at a time when Silicon Valley was less than 1% diverse. Today, it's very, very,
Yeah,
very multicultural, and there's a lot of obviously story of Indians go to the UK because of the colonial legacy and hangover rather. But there was not too much from your time going to Australia, which is why this story fascinates me. At a time today when I see Melbourne, downtown Melbourne, and Flinders Street is so diverse. But back then, because as a child, you don't have a sense of understanding why things are out of place, but you notice they're out of place. So that itself would have shaped your perspective to be the global citizen that you are, right? So, in South Indian by origin, Australian by nationality, living in Hong Kong, in a world that's globalization today, you already had a global perspective. So, has that shaped you into now better understand people and cultures and these global teams that you work with?
yeah. And in fact, I was chatting with a friend at lunch today, and I was saying that I'd love to say that I had this strategy from as a child to one day work in one of the world's largest international law firms. But I did not. But I have to say, it is true, Akshobh, that I wanted something that was bigger than provincial country Victoria. I wanted something where I was going to be surrounded by people that looked like me, but was also, from citizens of the world. I wanted to have that exposure to other cultures for sure, and I knew that that was something I was striving for. So I did choose a university that had a big group of international people from Monash University was also ahead of its time at that moment. Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, there were lots of people coming in. Not so much from India then, definitely now because I'm part of the alumni group and India is very much connected with Monash. But there were a lot of Indians in Singapore and Malaysia. And so I had this opportunity to get more in touch with my culture. I ended up being vice president of the India Society at Monash. And that was really interesting because with my accent, it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me to learn more about the culture and then impart that to the other students and so forth. So yeah, I think it's always been something that I wanted to be part of a world bigger than Australia, and I definitely have that opportunity.
The amazing thing about this podcast is we get to learn so much about people that you almost add on to my next questions because I was asking about that, thinking about this as well. Two things that come to mind. One is because you left India so young, and and most people don't remember life before they were six, and you found yourself being this immigrant, new implant in Australia, and then having to relearn India, a land that you were born into and culturally from your student exchanges. How was that experience as a member of the diaspora? And yet, perhaps when you met some Indian students coming to Australia, where you seem more foreigner to them and they seem foreign to you, how was relearning that part about being Indian as well, both in Australia with other Indian immigrants, and perhaps when you went and visited India and spoke to relatives in an Australian accent?
Yeah, so mum and dad were very good in that they did help me to retain a great deal of my culture. Not everything, because my father was someone who believed in assimilation rather than separatism. And many of the Indian families that had come to Australia around that same time were almost like acting as though India had stayed the same since 1971, and therefore they didn't move on, and they wanted to sort of talk about India in the same way. Whereas my father believed in having friendships with a wide variety of people from all different walks of life and cultures. And he definitely encouraged me to do the same. So I wasn't told I could only play with other Indian families, or and he really encouraged me to participate in the community. But at the same time, we did speak Malayalam at home from time to time. So it was a nice mixture of English and Malayalam. And I'll come back to my grandfather because he was a big link for me. Because he spoke English and wrote beautiful English, he would communicate with me through correspondence. And I still have his letters to today. He was somebody that I was very close to, and he maintained that link for me. And I still have those aerograms. I don't know, you're too young to know this, Akshobh, but we used to do these aerograms, and then you'd fold them up and you'd stick it, but you wanted to fit in as much writing as possible, so you wrote on the gluey bits and everything. Anyway, it was a treasure for me to have that link, because we couldn't afford to go back to India for 5 years after we arrived, just because it was expensive. Plane travel wasn't quite like it is now. And so we missed everyone. My parents missed their parents and siblings, and so it was great to have that connection. And food was the other connection. We couldn't get spices in Australia. We couldn't get chilies, but my grandfather would pack spices and send them by ship, and they would arrive. And oh my God, it was so amazing when those things arrived. My mother happened to be a fabulous cook, but the food and that sort of exchange, I think, made me keep India very close to my heart. So I wasn't a child that felt that I needed to discard my culture. I really wanted to ensure that I retained it. And I guess I've always done that. In circumstances where maybe it wasn't popular, Australia is not known. Well, it had a wide Australia policy at about that time, and so it wasn't embracing of cultural differences or diversity. So it was challenging, but I think it was important, and I knew it was important. In my heart, I knew it was important, and I think that kept me going. So today, as I sit in Mumbai, Bombay, right now, because I've been appointed chair of the India practice for Baker McKenzie, in addition to my day job, Akshobh. And one of the things that I'm doing is trying to work towards our firm setting up its first India office. And that to me is like so exciting, because it brings together all of those elements of me into my professional life and allows me to, contribute to India and have that experience, effectively give me that ability to be a bit more Indian again, because I crave that, and this is a fabulous opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. When I heard about the spice stories, you created your own new spice route. And you touched on the White Australia policy, because this is something that I was very fascinated by. And many people obviously look at Australia as the southern Anglosphere, the Anglosphere of the south, the one that wanted to be British and without the Oxford, Cambridge, and the Eton Harrow hubris. But does that, having lived in the US now for a while, there's something that I found very similar. Even no one talks about the US and Australia being similar, but in some ways, both had very regressive immigration laws after the gold rush. Melbourne and and California, coastal cities. Although the US, Australia doesn't have a hinterland the way the US does, and it was very interesting at a time where both countries were rediscovering what it meant. Immigration, globalization. Is that a fair comparison to Australia? That having lived in Singapore, now you're in Hong Kong, It was a country that didn't, even though it was more Asia Pacific than the rest of Asia, but didn't want to be pegged with the Asia Pacific world. But market opportunities meant that it had to be pegged with the Asia Pacific world.
Yeah, it's had a hot cold relationship, because I remember specifically my job before Baker was with one of the big four banks, and ANZ had an India presence with ANZ Grinlays, and it was interesting because they, in fact, had a very thriving business, but then they chose to go back and leave India. I would have suggested that if they'd stayed on, it probably would have been one of the most valuable parts of their business. But that was probably illustrative of a lot of business at that time. They wanted to get to know Asia and be part of it, but they really struggled to put the right people in charge of creating relationships, and they didn't really understand what relationships meant. So, for example, in terms of professionally, I do a lot of work in investigating corruption. Australia has had its fair share of corruption matters because they go into Asia and somebody says to them, you need to have this middleman, assist in terms of setting up a business. And they do, thinking that it's cultural and therefore we need to kind of embrace that. But of course, it's not cultural; it's criminal, like everywhere else in the world. And they don't sort of go further to investigate, and get advice. They just sort of jump in and get burnt and then jump out. So it is funny for us because Australia is in Asia, but it struggles to understand its role. And I think the current government is doing a lot better, I think, than previous governments, but there's still a long way to go. There really is a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Penny Wong now being the foreign minister, someone of Peranakan Malaysian origin. I remember reading an article called "Advance Australia Diverse" and play on the national anthem name, and it's a very fascinating country for me. And I just want to mention the part about India that you mentioned. Like there was a time that this immigrants normally when they come, they obviously have a frozen time mentality, and it's very redolent. Especially I've seen it as most of my family moved to the US as well. There was a because I think economic migration was sort of an economic refugee status, and people want to leave the baggage behind in some things. But I think right now there's more of a alacrity to embrace Indianness, that perhaps the new age Indian immigrants that grew up in the towns you grew up in, there's now more of that. Is it also a sign of where India is on the world stage? It's went from a country that was sort of had archaic stereotypes to now being a G5 economy. It's far bigger than Australia's economy. It's bigger than the UK economy. A colony overtaking the empire. So it's also where India is in the world stage that changed the narrative for the diaspora.
Of course. I mean, India has demonstrated that it's got so many of the magic sauce ingredients to make one of the most successful powerhouses. So this is its time. I think, Moody's calls it it's in its sweet spot. And I think, and interesting to me, India's also positioned itself quite nicely as a country where people can have connections, whether it be through sport or Bollywood or food or tourism. It's actually created a number of desirable elements that connect people in very rich and rewarding ways. So for Australia, I mean, it signed a free trade agreement and it is, really wanting to do business with India. You've got the technology boom. You've got a young workforce. So, English speaking, very educated. You've got opportunities. You've got this population of consumers, and some may call them aspiring purchasers of luxury and all these. it's a really rich business opportunity at the moment. So everyone is clamoring towards India. The UK, as you know, the free trade agreement is now back on the table. Even, the future administration in the US is very enamored of India, and Trump and Modi seem to have a very nice relationship. So, I think it is India's time. We've just got to hope that it works, right? Because it's still a very complicated country, and the states don't always play ball. And so there are still challenges ahead. But I think this is an exciting opportunity, and it means that it becomes the flavor of the time.
Which is why you have people like you in charge of the India practice to help understand this labyrinth of this complicated bureaucracy and the regulations, and cut through the complication, and get to the substance. I that's a you mentioned a lot about India, and I think that's the mark of India, the soft power element. I always believe that no matter where we are in the world with wars and conflict going on, it's soft power that obviously tells a country's story better, because people tell a better story than governments can, right? And I wanted to get to your legal background a little more, and one of the things I've been fascinated as once upon a time aspiring lawyer, but went the journalism route. Lessons on leadership that we've seen, as one of the things we've seen fascinating about countries, like as a lawyer, a lot of the founding leaders, especially in the country you're sitting in right now, India, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, beg your pardon, Mr. Ambedkar, who framed the Constitution, were all eminent lawyers and phenomenal legal minds. Even the US, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, all legal minds. So there are plenty of profession that produce outstanding individuals, doctors, engineers, but what is it about the legal profession that produces this eminent, perspicacious thinkers?
Yeah, I remember, as an Indian child, as you know, there are only, really three careers. There's doctor, engineer, and failure. So lawyers didn't really rate in that list. Funnily enough, so even in India, lawyers were not considered the creme de la creme. They were, because of course, there's so many court lawyers, and they were seen as sort of, touting for work outside the courts, and so their reputation was mixed in India. But at the same time, I think, my grandfather, again, always had said, no, Minnie, you need to be a lawyer. Maybe because I argued everything, but but I also loved sort of analysing the way people discoursed. So rather than having this black and white, the ability to use analysis to influence was something that I really enjoyed. Then looking at the way that people advocated for rights for their clients in court cases, I found fascinating. I was a debater. I liked speaking. I liked being able to communicate in that sort of sphere. I guess it really did point me very clearly down to this path. And I think with lawyers, we generally don't keep quiet. And I think that means that if we've got something to say, then whether it's politics, whether it's in a corporate environment, it can be a powerful voice. And I think for me, I went from private practice as a lawyer, and you would understand this, Akshobh, because when you're a lawyer, generally you either work in a firm or you go in-house, or some other kind of capacity within some government or other basis. So I went from a law firm, a boutique banking and finance firm, to in-house, to ANZ, in fact. And I was there for 4 years, and I could have stayed there and grown into senior roles, or even become a banker, because you see, that's what lawyers do. They become things. But actually, I really wanted to know more about the business of law. And I wanted the opportunity to advocate for clients in all sorts of sectors, I wanted to understand how business worked. And that was really what drew me back to the legal profession. And to be honest, I've been with Baker McKenzie for 26 years. So something's got to have worked because you don't stay that long unless, there's still a challenge to it and there's still a love for it. So interestingly enough, today I've got this new role, which is another challenge. It's a new opportunity. It gives me an ability to mix my Indian background, my legal skills, my love of communicating and advocating. This time I feel like I'm advocating for a whole country rather than just my clients.
That's called raising the bar high, to use a legal metaphor. This is actually fascinating because one of the things I've been very fascinated by in this conversation is that, how do you balance both the IQ, intellectual quotient, with the emotional quotient, EQ? Because the way I always saw it is I was a very right side creative mind, which is probably why my father, being wiser, said, listen, law is not just debating you, it's a lot of poring over documents, and you are not that person. Uh, the, there's a practical left side of your brain, the number crunching, the hard thinking, the M&A, the compliance, the risk that you look at, the corruption practices, that to anti-corruption practices and FML and all of that you have to look at. But there's an EQ element, which is empathy, the rights of the brain, understanding people. How do you balance that? There's the practical side versus the emotional side of understanding people. It just seems juxtaposed, but how do you bring the oil and water together?
Well, I really do think that it's communication is that blending agent. So when I was a commercial litigator for about 15 years of my practice, it you would think that would be much drier in terms of it was commercial litigation. So a lot of contract disputes, joint venture disputes, corporate, shareholder disputes. So you'd think that was just poring over documents, etc. But actually, those kind of cases, if it was just about documents, they'd never need to be litigated. It's because people had different understanding of what their relationship was going to look like. And it's a commercial relationship, but it's nevertheless a relationship. So they went into this relationship with an expectation that this party was going to do this and this party was going to bring this value and this promise was made and this money was going to be paid, etc. And then somewhere, somehow, that relationship broke down. And so part of my job was to listen, to understand, first of all, what the basis of that relationship was going to be, how it broke down, and do we have a way of repairing it for the future? So litigation can often also be resolved through mediation. I found myself embracing alternative dispute resolution for that reason, because if you have a mediated settlement, it's the parties coming together to reach a consensus, not somebody telling them who's right or who's wrong or who gets what. And that spoke to me because while I'm, you're right, I have an analytical brain. I also did a science degree as well as a law degree. My heart is still about people and communications. And, to be honest, that's probably why this has worked for me. I think if I was pure analytically minded, I don't think I would have perhaps enjoyed it as much. And I certainly wouldn't have necessarily progressed in the same way that others progress in the law. So put it this way, I don't want to be a Supreme Court judge. I really like being around people, and I like creating teams. I like getting the best out of the people that I'm with. I like to give my clients a good experience of what they're dealing with, however painful it is. I like to be intellectually curious about what makes people and companies tick in order to find the optimum outcome. It sounds really very airy-fairy, but I'm just trying to tell you that, for example, you could run a business and pay bribes and conduct yourself that way. Or you could work a little harder and run it without paying bribes, being seen as ethical, and today get the value of, reputational value. ESG recognizes working in ethical way. Employees strive to work for ethical companies. You save money because those bribes hit the bottom line. So here you've got two choices, and it's wonderful for me to be sort of steering companies and my clients towards business practices that's genuinely a win-win. And I don't think I would have been able to do that as just a technocrat lawyer. I think it's my love of people and getting to know what's what, that enables me to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. There's the intellectual curiosity is something that I try to have as well as a former journalist. Steve Jobs said so: "Stay hungry, stay foolish." Right? You know, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you manage across 50 lawyers across the region. Maybe the number's more. Apologies if I got that wrong. And from what I gather, people are the secret sauce. Is that the most important aspect you bring to leadership? A people's first approach.
People have to be a priority. As a law firm, we don't manufacture widgets. We produce nothing except people that can provide top quality legal services. So that's it, right? If you don't look after your people, you don't get the best out of them, you don't hire the best, retain the best, create an environment for them to do their best, then you failed in your business. And equally with clients, it's so much easier to retain a client than it is to win a brand new client. So again, take the time to get to know the people, and you'll find that the business will flow. Some of my best clients are people that I'm very good friends with. I enjoy talking to them. Yes, of course, they still pay my bills, but to be honest, it's a process that there's a benefit for both of us, and that's, to be honest, that makes life a lot nicer for everybody.
Mhm. You know, I don't know if this is a phrase from archaic days of yore, but sometimes they say most women who've had phenomenal success attribute it to also having a supportive spouse. Because I think to shatter the glass ceiling, it's not just women who can do it, because it's the other gender as well. Male allies like myself and so many other people. How true do you feel that is? Because balancing that guilt of motherhood, home, plus work, and having a career, it takes two to tango, doesn't it?
It does. And, when I moved to Hong Kong, one of the astonishing things for me was the ability to have domestic support. Because in Australia, we didn't have that. My husband and I met at university, the first week of university, may I say. So I was 17, he was 18, and we got married 6 years later. So we grew up together. But I think one of the things that we talked about right in the early days was that we both wanted to be professionally active, such that no one person felt that they were carrying the burden. And that's really important because, unfortunately, particularly in those days, and maybe even so now, being the person at home caring for children and the home and supporting one spouse is rarely rewarded or recognized or given the value that it deserves. And we wanted to make sure also that we could take risks. If both of us were fully engaged with work, but perhaps it wasn't working for one of us, we had the ability to take a risk and try something different and know that somebody had our back. So when you talk about having a supportive spouse, I even today say to women that I engage with, please partner well, because at the end of the day, that's the person that you'll come home to, and you will want somebody that you can talk to, be your absolute true self with. Know that they won't necessarily agree with everything you say. They will test you. They will question, are you really, are you really thinking this through? And I'll give you an example. I mean, this is a really interesting example for me. I went to a meeting here in Mumbai. It was somebody called for this meeting and asked to meet with me and said, I'm really interested to hear a bit about you, and I feel we can do, connect together on projects, etc. And I went there, and this man turned up with a woman who worked in his team, a junior person, and he proceeded to speak to me, at me, for the next, I don't know, 30 minutes. And he barely acknowledged his team member. And I came out of it saying, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, this fellow didn't obviously want to know anything about me, and et cetera, et cetera. So I went home and I explained this to my husband, Don, and who he's just finished his postgraduate studies in psychology. He's been business coaching forever. So he said, and I'm complaining, right? I'm saying this is, and instead of saying, oh, that's terrible, poor you, he said, well, actually, maybe you should have interrupted him and offered him your perspective and said, look, that's really interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and what I'm trying to achieve. Why did you not, push that and break that sort of, soliloquy that he was sharing? What made you sit back and think, I just have to put up with this, and then, feel aggrieved afterwards? That's the kind of partner you want, right? You want somebody who'll show you different perspectives, but who's got your back at the end of the day.
Yep, as a phrase goes, everyone's replaceable at work, but not replaceable at home. So that's important. You know, Minnie, we touched on a lot of your childhood and speaking about your parents and your grandparents, but how about your role as a mother right now? Because what are the lessons you sort of imparted to your children that you got from your parents, albeit knowing that you were raised differently, your children are going to be raised differently, and you're growing up in different times. So each generation, will have a back in my day kind of way of explaining. So h- because that's also a lot of learning and unlearning what you learned as a kid from your mom and dad and what you're imparting to your kids as a mom. So what has that been for you as well?
Yeah, it's there are a lot of things that I want to give my boys. So I've got two boys. My eldest Tice is 31, and my youngest Sanjay is 25. And one of the things that I did want to give them is that cultural connection, because my husband's not Indian, and so the boys are very fortunate. They've got Dutch heritage, they've got Indian heritage, they've been brought up in Australia. The youngest spent the last 3 years of his high school in Hong Kong. They're like our modern generation. They have the world at their fingertips, but at the same time, I think it is cultural belonging and community that gives kids the best support and foundation. Everything else is decoration and, to be honest, could be stripped back. But if they were left with a feeling of belonging and a feeling of being part of a community, I think that they will survive and prosper anywhere. So that's something my parents gave me. I felt very much, even though I was in Australia, away from all of our family back in India, I still felt connected, and I still felt that I had a community that would be there for me no matter what. So I think Don also was brought up similarly. His father came out from Holland after the Second World War with very little, but again wanted to create a family and give them that level of support and love and connection. So I think that's hugely important. I'm probably a different parent to my mother, let me say. But at the same time, they love their grandmother, and, they get the best out of her. She might have been tougher on me, but as a grandmother, she's putty in their hands. So to be honest, I genuinely think that the boys, that's really built them. But the second is, I've got two boys, as I stress, and I needed them to be really good men. I wanted them to be respectful of women. I wanted them to work with women as equals. I wanted them to support women in if that was their chosen partnership. I wanted them to be domestically strong. I wanted them to be good cooks and being able to do all the household chores. And look, you know what? They're better cooks than me these days. So to be honest, I think that's one of the most valuable lessons I can give them. And I hope that future daughters-in-law or otherwise will also feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what our previous guest on the show said the same thing. She has a son and a daughter. People like, how are you teaching your daughter? She's like, I'm teaching my son. So that's how we do that. And I think you touch on a very interesting thing as an Indian male. I realize one of the biggest things that we could do better is to learn to cook at a young age and break the archaic stereotypes. And you mentioned about this generational gap between your parents and yourself as a parent. One of the things that changed with this generation is mental health. Growing up in India, it wasn't spoken about enough. I'm pretty sure in Australia or the West, it wasn't spoken about as much. How do you think about mental health today, the priority in the workplace? Encouraging your staff to perhaps take mental health days or understanding, because we talk about bringing our best selves to work, but that may not be the case if there's mental health, right? And now we've become very cognizant about it in this day and age. Hollywood celebrities, sports stars of all the external validation still have, mental health breakdowns. So you can imagine the rest of us. It's
Yeah.
not a bed of roses either.
No, it's look at the profession and many professions. It's tough. There is more to be done by fewer people. The way that businesses structure their employee requirements is different. There is no 9 to 5. For a long time there hasn't been 9 to 5. Technology means that you're always accessible. I remember when the BlackBerry first came out, I thought it was a boon because I thought, oh great, I can go to the boys' school things and I can still be connected to the office. Oh my God, was I deluded, because what it did mean was I was always connected. Holidays were no longer when you switched off your computer and you didn't switch it back on until you got back to the office. Suddenly, your time, I know, and and that I think has impacted a lot of people's mental health because they don't get that ability to genuinely clear their head and reconnect with things that are really important to them on a day-to-day basis, let alone on a vacation basis. I'm talking coming home, being able to be present with your family, being able to be, to have conversations and share difficulties. It is becoming more challenging to get people's attention. So I think as a leader, my role is to be very much aware of what my team members need. And one of the, we see this because people's needs change from when they're juniors and life is just in front of them, uh, where they may, become parents, or they are older and their parents also suffer ill health or needs. You get pulled in all sorts of different directions. So I think, one of the things I recognized early on was we had to create an environment where it was not all about me or individuals, it was about teams. Because if you have a really good team, you should all support each other. And that team includes me. It means that if somebody needs to switch off, then the rest of the team members kick in and manage for them. It means that when people go on holidays, we do our very best to not bother them during holidays. It doesn't always work, but you need to strive for that. And I think giving people space, time, support goes a long way. It doesn't solve, all the challenges we face in terms of mental health issues, but it goes a long way for people to know they have that community. And I come back to that feeling of belonging, feeling that you're in a place where people value you, and giving you the ability to speak and let us know when things are not going well, so that others can step in, uh, and that support mechanism, that support network can really kick in. I think that's important.
That brings me to a two-parter question about this, because you've touched on, you're peeling the onion layer, and now we're getting to some more of the core substance. A lot of young people may seem rudderless today because they don't get the right mentorship. So what words of advice would you have, both for young people looking for mentors because it's intimidating to approach your peers, and perhaps also for some of your peers and contemporaries right now who are in leadership roles, on how they can help young people develop a voice? Because there's always a sense of, oh, millennials are like this, Gen Z like this. Every generation thinks they got it right, the next generation we would. But this two-parter question: what can young people do to find mentorship? Because not everyone's fortunate to have mini Menon as a boss. So what can they do? And two is, what can leaders do to encourage young people to find their footing? Because a boss is once a intern once.
That's true. And this comes back to what you were saying about, immigrants when they come to a new country and then they keep acting as though their home country stays the same. And that's very much like that in our business and our work environments. People sort of feel like, well, this is the way it was for me, so therefore this is the way it's got to be. And so what's wrong are these younger people who just don't get the story, and they just don't do what I did to survive. That is total rubbish, and that will not work. I can let you know, that's no secret. It just won't work. So you may as well stop now and try a different tactic. And so there needs to be an evolving culture in business, and leaders need to evolve. And that's probably not happening fast enough. They need to know that you've got younger people who are looking for something different. And if you don't go towards meeting that, if there's no compromise, no concessions, no meeting of minds, no willingness to listen and act, then you're just going to lose them. And what does that do? It just means that we work for longer time. We'll continue to be working, training up new people, losing them, and continuing to be there until much older age than we had wanted to. So I think leaders definitely need to know that it isn't going to go back to the way it was. And they need to change, and they need to create environments of change. It's easier said than done. I mean, you look at with COVID, suddenly you had this ability to work from home. This was something people have been wanting, a little bit more flexibility. They wanted to be able to do important things related to their home and family while not necessarily sacrificing compensation. And they felt, I can do this. Who says I have to work between these hours? You already expect me to clock on later and earlier. So why can't I do my best work between 9 p.m. and midnight? Because that's when everything's quiet. But I've had the benefit of eating dinner with the family. I've had the benefit of walking the dog. I've had the benefit of doing a yoga class. But I'm still productive. And productivity actually was, very measurably improving during COVID. And people thought, well, this is different. But where are we today? It's 2024, and you've got, companies saying, come back to the office. Now, there are some good reasons for that, but there is also a sort of a mix reaction to that, because unfortunately people got used to having that flexibility, and taking it away from them means that you're going to create another set of issues and concerns. Now, so I put a lot on leadership. I put a lot on organizations to make changes. But at the same time, I'm a mother of two young people who seem to think that spending, maybe a year or two in one occupation is like, oh my God, it's the longest time. And I should either be the CEO or I should be looking at new challenges and I'm not being recognized. Or, I hear that so much. I hear it from people within our firm. I hear it from young people outside. I think a little bit of patience would go a long way with younger people. And I think they too need to listen a little bit more and being willing to compromise, because it's never going to be one way or the other. It's got to be a meeting of minds. And one thing I think we can do better is speaking with each other and trying to understand what the what each have to say. And but it takes both. It's not about just leaders having to sit and listen and change everything to suit the new generation. It's also about the new generation understanding and taking the opportunity to think, how does business work? Where do I fit in? What could I be looking for? Where does the patience factor come in? Because everything's not going to happen overnight. Instant gratification is not always going to be available in our businesses. So what can I do to be a little bit more flexible myself?
Yeah. At the time when maybe the next generation plays 26 months too much, you play your 26 years card. I wanted to ask you, one of the things I have felt is very important is it's important to learn, but also important to unlearn, because that's how culturally we break stereotypes, we change regressive policies and archaic philosophies. If I could, sum up and ask you, in your own personal journey as well as your corporate journey and your leadership journey, important lessons that you've had to unlearn or relearn new things, because unlearning is also powerful because it gives humility to understand that, okay, maybe I was wrong about this, and new concepts. And on that learning and unlearning thing, what would be your advice for posterity and for young women leaders as well?
I often use the word resilience as one of the hallmarks uh, of people's success, because when things don't go the way you would like them to go, there are always those choices, right? We can sit there and sort of sink into it and feel sorry for ourselves, or we could really take those valuable lessons and improve a number of factors, perhaps improve the way we approach things, improve relationships that are around us in order to support us do better, improve the circumstances. And sometimes that means changing where you are, moving to a different organization or a different environment. But you do need to learn, and that's fundamental to being able to take risks, because taking risks doesn't always mean success and a win every time. My career journey and my personal journey has been one of taking risks. I come from a culture with arranged marriages, and here I go marrying a half Dutch, half Australian guy. I go into a legal profession, and I take the chance of going in-house rather than the safety of just going through a firm. I go from Australia, where I had a great community and family and everything, and take the plunge to move to Hong Kong. All of these risks weren't just a linear, stepping block, one after the other. In between, I had a number of different setbacks where I felt maybe I had to leave the firm to experience a change and be based in Asia. It didn't happen quickly. It took a couple of years for the firm and I to work out what this is going to look like. And I needed to put skin in the game to make it happen. In terms of being, in a mixed race marriage, I needed to convince my family back in India that this is what a happy marriage can look like. I needed to get to know my in-laws who had never had a person of color within their family, and get them to, attend an Indian wedding, being ours, and eat off banana leaves and with their hands. And so, all along the way, there are always going to be things that don't quite go as well as planned. Then there are things that succeed, but each have been valuable as the other in terms of helping to make me who I am. And having the support around me means that I can take those risks and know that if I fall, there'll be people to catch me.
Thank you, Minnie. If you fall, if people to catch you, that's a very profound way to end this. There's always going to be a safety net, but doesn't mean we don't take the leap as well. Minnie, man, and we can be here all day long, but I know I don't want to stay between you and sleep and a good night's rest. Thank you so much for being on the part of She. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Akshobh. Lovely speaking with you.